Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're gonna be reviewing Mass Media Stars by the band Acqua.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
Ooh, we have another Italian prog album. We've reviewed one just, what was it, like 2 days ago? I am so excited for it, but anyway, here's some of my favorite bits from this album.
Drip. Do not quit when your dictionary fails. Life is smiling from us, and the sparking goes out in the air. The only ones who are standing, who possess the political touch. It was your own life that you was created.
So Acqua formed back in 1970 but only released their first album in 1973. And the reason for that is because they opted to create their music and sing it in English, which was very unfavorable at the time with Italian record companies who didn't really want to publish this album all the way up until 1973. And when the album was eventually released, it actually kind of flopped, and for the reason that the record companies didn't want to publish it from the get-go because it was sung in English and that wasn't accepted at the time, and unfortunately that first album didn't even get a US release. So what did the band do on their second album? Well, they did just the same thing. They actually made yet another album in English despite the pressure that was put on them after releasing their flopping first album. And this second album is the one we're looking at today, called Mass Media Stars, and this one actually did get a US release and was somewhat popular. But this spurt of popularity didn't really last long for the band, and unfortunately right after releasing this album, their vocalist Bernardo Lazzetti actually left this band to join forces with PFM and sing for them in their English releases. So the band tried to remain active and create more music after Bernardo's departure, but they didn't really succeed in doing that and unfortunately disbanded in 1975. But since the turn of the centuries, the band has actually reformed twice and are active as of now. Under the new alias of Acqua Project. And looking at it in hindsight, Acqua were actually being ahead of their time, seeing as Lazzetti was actually living in the USA until he was 14, he had a very strong connection with the language of English and he came back to Italy wanting to create English music. And this choice, despite not being favorable for them at the time, did really become quite popular with a lot of the mainstream Italian prog bands releasing English versions for their albums later on. But how was Acqua run? How is this album? Well, personally, I'd give this album the title of being the perfect middle ground between Yes and Genesis. Yes, you heard me right, I really do mean that. The music on here, it's just composed and it's performed like you'd expect Yes off of, let's say, albums like Relayer or Tales from Topographic Oceans, and there's really that very strong sense of storytelling and quirkiness that's found on early Genesis. And it's all tied together with Lazzetti's vocals, which honestly to me sound quite a lot like David Surkamp's from Pavlov's Dog. And by the way, if you don't know Pampered Manials from Pavlov's Dog, you should really go ahead and check that album out. Now I really want to go on a tangent and tell you all how loyal this album sounds to Yes and to Genesis and really how good it really is. And if you don't know this album, you probably wouldn't believe me right now when I'm telling you that it really has that Yes sound, but trust me, it really does. And if you don't know this album, you should really go ahead and listen to it because it's something that you should get to know. And yes, I am well aware that my main point of praising this album is their ability to recreate the sound of another band, and that might sound to you like unoriginality, and technically you'd be right. But in my honest opinion, I don't think that the music on here really repeats or copies directly anything that Yes or Genesis have done, it just really embraces their sound and takes a new approach to it. And if you go ahead and search for this album on the Prog archives, you're gonna see something that to me at least was kind of funny. A lot of people rated this review saying that it's a great album and it really does sound like Yes and like Genesis, and they really loved it, but they all eventually gave it 3 stars out of 5, which is, mind you, not what you'd expect from people saying that an album is actually great. But the reason for all of them doing that is basically because Acqua Fragile were copying another band, and people just tend to really not like when bands do that, but I honestly, in my opinion, really love that, and I love bands that embrace other bands' sound, but I guess that after a while, when you're listening to so many copycats, there's just a limit to how much you can handle. And if you didn't catch this one already, I really like this album. Like, I really like this album. Everything about it just really sounds right. The songs, they're unique and distinct from one another. There's beautiful harmony between the instruments, and if I'm talking about harmony, then the harmonies of Lanzetti with his backing vocals from the band are absolutely fantastic. It's basically as good as, if not better than, the harmonies done by Anderson, Howe, and Squire. And this album really is truly amazing. I'm actually having a hard time telling you all what's my favorite song from it, just because they're all so good. Now, I do get it. This album isn't perfect and there is some sense of unoriginality on it at times, and that's probably the main point that is kind of obstructing the perfection that this album might have been, but honestly, I really love it, and I think that it's pretty criminally underrated by many people. Cause let's face it, if you're going on the Prog archives and you see this album which has a 3.23 star rating, you might not go ahead and listen to it despite it being very great. But hey, that's just my opinion. You might think another thing, and I'd love to hear what you think down in the comments. I hate to say it, but when you're making a cover, your appearance is very important, and if I should say and note this one out, the appearance of the band on here really doesn't strike me as all that good looking. There is something very personal of putting an image of your band on the cover of your album, but honestly, a lot of the times it just ends up looking benign, and definitely in this instance it does. And for an album that their last album really didn't go all that well, I would have to urge that they really needed a better cover for this one, because no one's gonna see the Acqua Fragile name and be like, oh yeah, this is something I want to check out. And I think that with the Yes inspirations of this album, a Roger Dean-like cover would have worked fantastically on here. It doesn't have to be made by Roger Dean, they probably didn't have the money for it at the time, but still I think that it would have worked really nice with the music found on here. And they just should have saved the band photo for like the back of the cover or the gatefold. Who knows, in 2024 this album will be 50 years old and maybe we're gonna get a reissue, and maybe then the cover would have something better to show for it. But putting the cover aside, I don't care what anyone has to say about this album, this one to me is a no-brainer 9 out of 10. But anyway, I want to thank my lovely supporters over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Walnum, you are the best, and if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my About page. But that's about it guys, have a wonderful day and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye guys.